The sheriff's fist slammed against the wooden counter hard enough to rattle bottles. You think you can save a dying man when you can barely climb onto your own horse? Mara Whitlock felt every eye in the saloon burn into her back, heard the snickers spreading like wildfire. The trapper's voice cracked with desperation. Rhett Mercer was bleeding out in the mountains, and she was the only one who could help. But to Black Hollow Ridge, she wasn't a nurse. She was a joke. Too soft, too heavy, too weak. The storm outside screamed warnings no one would survive the climb. Mara grabbed her medical bag anyway. If you're watching from somewhere in this world, drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're already hooked, hit that like button. You're going to want to see how this ends. The wind off the northern peaks cut through Black Hollow Ridge like a blade made of ice and broken promises. Mara Whitlock kept her head down as she crossed Main Street, her medical bag heavy against her hip, boots crunching through frozen mud that hadn't thawed since October. She'd learned years ago not to make eye contact. It only invited commentary. There goes the nurse, someone muttered from the porch of the general store. Laughter followed, low and mean. Mara's jaw tightened, but she didn't slow down. She had 2 patients to check on before nightfall. Old Mrs. Callahan, with her persistent cough, and the blacksmith's son who'd burned his hand last week. Neither one would thank her. They never did. But she'd show up anyway because that's what a nurse did. Even when the town treated her like a burden, they were too polite to outright reject. The saloon doors banged open ahead of her and she stepped aside instinctively. 3 men stumbled out, reeking of whiskey and tobacco. One of them, a ranch hand named Cully, nearly walked straight into her. Jesus, he said, reeling back like she'd burned him. Watch where you're standing. I was standing still, Mara said quietly. Well, stand somewhere else. His eyes raked over her with open disdain, blocking the whole damn sidewalk. She wasn't. There was plenty of room. But Mara had stopped arguing about things like that a long time ago. She moved to the side, closer to the hitching post, and waited for them to pass. Cully said something under his breath that made his friends laugh. She didn't catch the words, but she didn't need to. She'd heard every variation by now. Inside the mercantile, Mrs. Gaines barely looked up when Mara entered. You need something? Just picking up the salve I ordered last week. The older woman disappeared into the back room, taking her time. Mara stood at the counter, listening to the clock tick, feeling the familiar weight of being unwelcome settle over her shoulders like a wet coat. When Mrs. Gaines finally returned, she set the small tin on the counter with a little more force than necessary. $2. The catalog said $1.50. Prices went up. Mara pulled the coins from her pocket without arguing. She'd learned that too. Pick your battles. Save your energy for the ones that mattered. She was halfway back to her small cabin on the edge of town when the shouting started. It came from the direction of the saloon, men's voices, urgent and overlapping. Mara hesitated, then turned back. A crowd was forming near the hitching posts, and through the shifting bodies she caught sight of a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, gaunt, with a beard caked in ice and blood smeared across his coat. He swayed on his feet like he might collapse at any second. Please, the man was saying, his voice hoarse and ragged. Please, someone's got to help him. He's dying up there. Sheriff Dalton Vane stood in front of the stranger, arms crossed, expression hard. The sheriff was a big man, broad-shouldered and solid, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the weather too long. He had a reputation for keeping order, but Mara had always thought there was something cold in his eyes, something that enjoyed the authority a little too much. Start from the beginning, Vane said, and stop babbling. The stranger, a trapper, by the looks of him, gulped air like a drowning man. It's Rhett Mercer. He got mauled by a grizzly 3 days ago. He's holed up in his cabin, but he's bleeding bad. Infection's setting in. He needs help. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mara saw faces she recognized. The blacksmith, the saloon owner, a handful of ranch hands and miners. None of them looked eager to volunteer. Rhett Mercer, Vane repeated slowly. That mountain man who lives up past Widow's Peak? Yes, sir. The one who doesn't come down here unless he needs supplies, barely talks to anyone, and keeps a rifle within arm's reach at all times? He's dying, the trapper said desperately. I tried to patch him up, but I don't know what I'm doing. He needs a doctor. Nearest doctor's in Silverton, someone called out. 3 days ride, and the pass is snowed in. Then he needs someone with medical training, the trapper said, his eyes scanning the crowd. Anyone, please. Mara felt her pulse quicken. She stepped forward before she could think better of it. I can help. The crowd turned to look at her. The silence that followed felt heavy, weighted with judgment. Sheriff Vane's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Miss Whitlock, I'm a trained nurse, Mara said, forcing her voice to stay steady. I've treated infections, stitched wounds, set bones. If this man needs help, I can provide it. You ever treated a grizzly mauling before? No, but I know how to clean a wound and fight infection. That's what he needs right now. Vane looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. It's a hard ride up to Widow's Peak. Rough terrain, steep climbs. Storm's coming in tonight, and it's going to be a bad one. I'm aware. You think you can handle that? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Mara met his gaze and didn't flinch. Yes. Someone in the crowd snorted. Mara didn't turn to see who. Miss Whitlock, Vane said, his voice taking on a tone of exaggerated patience. I appreciate your willingness to help, but let's be realistic here. You're a fine nurse for stitching up cuts and treating fevers, but this is different. This is survival. Cold, rough country, dangerous animals, and a man who's probably half dead already. You'd need to ride hard, climb steep trails in the dark, and haul medical supplies through a blizzard. No offense, but I don't think you're built for that kind of work. Heat flared in Mara's chest. What does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like. Vane gestured toward her in a way that felt deliberately dismissive. You're not exactly equipped for frontier survival. You'd slow down before you got halfway there, maybe fall off your horse, freeze to death in a ditch. Then we'd have 2 bodies to recover instead of 1. The crowd murmured agreement. Mara felt the weight of their stares, the unspoken consensus that she was foolish for even offering. I've ridden through storms before, she said quietly. Not like this one. Vane shook his head. Look, I'm trying to save your life here. Stay in town. Let someone else handle it. Who? Mara looked around the crowd. Who else is going? No one spoke. The trapper stared at the ground, shoulders slumped in defeat. Mercer's a hard man, someone muttered. Lives like an animal up there. Probably brought this on himself. He's still a human being, Mara said sharply. Maybe. Vane's voice hardened. But he's also a man who chose to live alone in the wilderness, away from civilization. He knew the risks. We can't risk someone else's life just to drag him back from a mistake he made. So you're just going to let him die? I'm being practical. Vane stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You're not going up that mountain, Miss Whitlock. I won't allow it. You'd be dead before sunrise, and I'm not explaining to this town why I let their nurse ride off into a blizzard on some fool's errand. You don't have the authority to stop me. His eyes went cold. I have the authority to protect the people of this town, and that includes protecting them from losing the only medical care they've got. Mara's hands clenched into fists. You mean protecting them from the embarrassment of a fat woman freezing to death because she tried to do something brave? The words came out louder than she'd intended. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Vane's jaw tightened. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. Mara turned to face the crowd, her voice rising. All of you. You think I'm too weak, too soft, too heavy to survive out there. You think I'll collapse halfway up the trail and die because I'm not strong enough. Well, maybe you're right. Maybe I will. But at least I'll die trying to save a man's life instead of standing here making excuses while he bleeds out alone. No one answered. The trapper looked at her with something like hope flickering in his exhausted eyes. Sheriff Vane took a step closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You ride out of here tonight, you're on your own. No one's coming to save you if you get in trouble. I know. You'll probably die. Maybe. And it won't change anything. Mercer's as good as dead already. Then I'll give him company in his last hours. Mara met his gaze without flinching. That's more than anyone here is willing to do. Vane stared at her for a long moment, then stepped back. Fine. Get yourself killed if you want. Just don't expect me to send a search party when you don't come back. Mara turned to the trapper. How do I find his cabin? The man straightened, relief flooding his face. Follow the north trail past Widow's Peak. There's a fork near the old pine that got split by lightning. Take the left path and keep climbing. The cabin's in a clearing near the ridge line. You'll know it when you see it. How long? 4 hours in good weather. maybe 6 or 7 in this. He glanced at the sky, where dark clouds were rolling in from the mountains. Storm's gonna hit hard. Then I'd better get moving. Mara adjusted her bag and started toward the livery stable. Miss Whitlock. The trapper's voice stopped her. Thank you. She nodded once, then kept walking. Behind her, the crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. She caught fragments of conversation. Foolish, waste, won't last an hour. But she didn't slow down. At the stable, old Tom was brushing down a gray mare. He looked up when Mara entered, surprise crossing his weathered face. Need a horse, Mara said. Now? Right now. Tom glanced toward the open stable doors where the wind was starting to pick up. Storm's coming. I know. He studied her for a moment, then sighed and moved toward the stalls. You want Greta? She's steady in rough weather, won't spook easy. Thank you. Tom saddled the mare without further comment, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. When he finished, he handed Mara the reins and hesitated. You sure about this? No, Mara said honestly, but I'm going anyway. Fair enough. He patted the horse's neck. Gretel'll take care of you. Just give her head when the trail gets rough. She knows these mountains better than most people. Mara swung into the saddle, ignoring the protest of muscles that weren't used to riding. She secured her medical bag behind the saddle, checked that her coat was buttoned tight, and pulled her scarf up over her nose and mouth. Tom stepped back, his expression unreadable. Good luck, Miss Whitlock. Thank you, Tom. She urged Greta forward, out of the stable and into the biting wind. The town watched her go. She could feel their eyes on her back, feel the weight of their doubt and judgment, but she didn't look back. She kept her gaze fixed on the mountains ahead, where the snow-covered peaks rose like jagged teeth against the darkening sky. The North Trail started just beyond the edge of town, winding up into the foothills through stands of pine and aspen. Mara let Greta set the pace, trusting the mare's instincts as the path grew steeper and the wind grew stronger. Snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier, until the world around her turned white and formless. She lost track of time. Minutes blurred into hours. The cold seeped through her coat, through her gloves, until her fingers ached and her face went numb. Greta climbed steadily, her breath coming in great plumes of steam, her hooves finding purchase on ice-slicked rock. Mara's mind wandered. She thought about the sheriff's words, about the crowd's laughter, about every moment in her life when someone had looked at her and decided she wasn't enough. Too heavy, too slow, too weak. She'd spent years trying to prove them wrong, trying to be useful, trying to earn respect through competence and care. And it had never mattered. They still saw her as a burden. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was going to die out here. Maybe this whole thing was just one last desperate attempt to prove her worth to people who would never value her anyway. But then she thought about Rhett Mercer, alone in a cabin, bleeding and dying with no one willing to help. She thought about the trapper's desperate plea, about the casual cruelty in the sheriff's voice, about the way the crowd had turned away rather than lift a finger. And she thought, at least I tried. At least I cared. The fork in the trail appeared suddenly, the lightning-split pine rising out of the snow like a skeletal hand. Mara turned Greta left and kept climbing. The wind howled around them, tearing at her coat, filling her ears with a roar that drowned out thought. Her legs burned. Her hands had gone beyond pain into a dull, distant numbness. She couldn't feel her feet in the stirrups anymore. But Greta kept moving, kept climbing, and Mara held on. The cabin appeared like a ghost through the swirling snow. A low, dark shape crouched against the mountainside, smoke rising from a stone chimney. Mara's heart leaped. She'd made it. She was here. She dismounted clumsily, her legs nearly buckling when they hit the ground. She tied Greta's reins to a post near the cabin, grabbed her medical bag, and staggered to the door. It wasn't locked. She pushed it open and stumbled inside, snow following her in a rush of wind and cold. The cabin was small, dimly lit by a fire burning low in the hearth. It smelled like wood smoke, blood, and infection. And there, sprawled on a rough-hewn bed against the far wall, was Rhett Mercer. He was massive, easily over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and thick-armed, with a wild tangle of dark hair and a beard that obscured most of his face. His chest was wrapped in blood-soaked bandages, and his skin had the grayish pallor of someone hovering on the edge of death. His eyes opened when she entered, fever bright and unfocused. Who? I'm a nurse, Mara said, her voice hoarse from the cold. I'm here to help. He stared at her for a long moment, confusion flickering across his face. Then his eyes rolled back, and he went still. Mara dropped her bag and moved to his side, her numb fingers fumbling with the bandages. She peeled them back and bit back a gasp. The wounds were catastrophic. 4 parallel gashes ran from his left shoulder down across his ribs, deep enough to expose muscle and bone. The edges were ragged, swollen, and oozing a mix of blood and pus. Infection had set in hard. She could see the telltale red streaks radiating out from the wounds, could smell the sickly sweet stench of rotting flesh. Damn, she whispered. She had maybe 12 hours before the infection killed him. Maybe less. Mara forced her frozen hands to move. She built up the fire first, feeding it until the flames roared and heat began to fill the cabin. Then she stripped off her coat, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. She boiled water in a battered pot over the fire, sterilized her instruments as best she could, and laid out her supplies on a clean cloth. Needle and thread, carbolic acid, clean bandages, laudanum for the pain, though she doubted Rhett was conscious enough to feel much of anything. She started with the infection. She cleaned the wounds with boiled water and carbolic acid, scrubbing away the pus and dead tissue while Rhett groaned and thrashed beneath her hands. She had to pin his arm down with her body weight to keep him still, her muscles straining with the effort. I'm sorry, she murmured, even though he probably couldn't hear her. I'm so sorry. The work was brutal. Her hands cramped. Her back ached. Blood soaked through the cloth beneath him, dripped onto the floor, stained her sleeves. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, rattling the shutters, howling like something alive and angry. Inside the cabin, Mara stitched and cleaned and bandaged, her world narrowing to the wounds beneath her hands, the rhythm of her breathing, the warmth of the fire at her back. At some point, Rhett's eyes opened again. He looked at her, his gaze clearer now, focused. You're real, he said, his voice barely more than a rasp. I'm real. Who are you? Mara Whitlock. I'm a nurse. From town? Yes. He frowned, confusion creasing his brow. Why? Mara paused, needle and thread in hand, blood on her fingers. Because you needed help. No one ever. He trailed off, his eyes sliding shut again. Stay with me, Mara said sharply. Don't you dare die on me now. His eyes opened. Why do you care? The question hit her harder than it should have. She looked down at his ruined chest, at the mess of stitches and bandages, at the man who'd been left to die alone because no one thought he was worth saving. Because everyone deserves to be cared for, she said quietly, even if the world says otherwise. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of emotion she couldn't quite name. They sent you because no one else would come. They didn't send me. I came on my own. Why? I already told you. No. His hand moved, fingers brushing against her wrist. Why would you risk your life for someone you've never met? Mara didn't have a good answer for that. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't want to say it out loud. So she focused on tying off the last stitch, on wrapping clean bandages around his chest, on doing the work that needed to be done. You should rest, she said finally. So should you. She glanced toward the window where the storm showed no signs of letting up. I'll rest when you're stable. I'm stable now. You're alive. That's not the same thing. She moved to the fire, adding another log, then filled a tin cup with water from the pot. Can you drink? He nodded, and she helped him sit up enough to sip from the cup. His hand shook, water spilling down his beard, but he managed a few swallows before collapsing back onto the bed. Thank you, he said. Mara set the cup aside. You're welcome. What's your name again? Mara. Mara. He repeated it slowly, like he was testing the shape of it. That's a good name. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. I'm Rhett. I know. Right. He closed his eyes. The whole town probably knows my name. Mountain man, recluse, crazy bastard who lives alone and talks to trees. I don't think you're crazy. His eyes opened, searching her face. You don't know me. I know you're still alive because you fought off a grizzly and survived long enough for help to arrive. That's not crazy. That's strong. He laughed, a rough, bitter sound. I'm dying. Not tonight. You sure about that? Yes. He studied her for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. You're different. Different how? From everyone else, from town, from... He trailed off, his gaze distant. I haven't had someone look at me like that in a long time. Like what? Like I'm human. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Mara felt something twist in her chest. Recognition, maybe. Or kinship. You are human, she said softly. So are you. She looked away, her throat suddenly tight. Get some rest, Rhett. We'll talk more in the morning. Will you stay? I'm not going anywhere. Promise? The desperation in his voice caught her off guard. She turned back to him, saw the fear in his eyes, not of death, but of abandonment, of being left alone again. I promise, she said. He closed his eyes, and within moments his breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep. Mara sat down on the floor near the fire, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. Her hands were still shaking, her back screamed in protest, and she was pretty sure she'd never been this tired in her entire life. But she'd done it. She'd ridden through a blizzard, climbed a mountain, and saved a man's life. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt like she mattered. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, it was warm and quiet. Mara pulled her knees to her chest, rested her head against the wall, and let herself breathe. Mara woke to the sound of someone moving. Her neck was stiff, her back ached from sleeping against the wall, and for a disorienting moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then the smell of wood smoke and infection brought it all back. The cabin, the storm, Rhett Mercer barely clinging to life. She jerked upright, her hand reaching instinctively for her medical bag. Across the room, Rhett was trying to sit up, his face twisted with pain and effort. Stop, Mara said, scrambling to her feet. You'll tear your stitches. Need to... He gasped, one hand pressed against his bandaged chest. Need to piss. Then let me help you. I can do it myself. You can barely lift your arm. He glared at her, pride and frustration warring in his eyes. But when he tried to swing his legs off the bed, his face went gray and he swayed dangerously to the side. Mara caught him, her hands gripping his uninjured shoulder. The weight of him nearly knocked her off balance, but she planted her feet and held steady. Easy, I've got you. I don't need... Yes, you do. She maneuvered herself under his arm, taking as much of his weight as she could manage. There's a chamber pot under the bed. We're going to take this slow, and you're going to let me help, because if you fall and split yourself open, I'm going to be very annoyed. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a groan. Wouldn't want that. No, you wouldn't. They made it to the edge of the bed where Mara retrieved the chamber pot and then turned her back to give him what privacy she could. She heard him struggling, heard his breathing turn ragged with effort and pain, but she didn't turn around until he spoke. Done. She helped him back to the bed, and this time he didn't argue. He collapsed against the pillows like all the strength had been wrung out of him, his skin sheened with sweat despite the morning chill. Mara checked his bandages, relieved to find them still intact. How do you feel? Like I got mauled by a grizzly. That's accurate. She pressed her hand to his forehead. Still warm, but not as burning as yesterday. Fever's down a little. That good? Better than the alternative. He closed his eyes, exhausted from the minimal effort. How long was I out? Most of the night. Mara moved to the fire and stirred the coals back to life. Sun's up now. Storm passed a few hours ago. You didn't sleep. I slept some. Sitting against the wall doesn't count. Mara glanced at him, surprised. You were awake? On and off. He opened his eyes, watching her. You stayed the whole time. I told you I would. People say a lot of things. She didn't have an answer for that, so she focused on stoking the fire. The cabin gradually warmed, and pale morning light filtered through gaps in the shutters. Outside, she could hear the wind still moving through the trees, but it had lost its violent edge. The worst had passed. You hungry? Mara asked. Not really. You need to eat anyway. Keep your strength up. Rhett made a non-committal sound. Mara explored the cabin, taking stock of supplies. There wasn't much. Dried meat, some hardtack, a sack of beans, a few withered potatoes. She found a dented pot and started boiling water for broth, adding strips of dried venison and a pinch of salt she discovered in a tin on a rough shelf. The cabin was sparse, almost brutal in its simplicity. One room, one bed, a table with two chairs that didn't match, and a few shelves holding basic necessities. No books, no decorations, nothing personal except a rifle mounted above the door and a knife collection displayed on the wall. It felt less like a home and more like a place someone survived in. "How long have you lived here?" Mara asked. 12 years, maybe 13. I stopped counting. That's a long time to be alone. That was the point. She stirred the broth, waiting for him to elaborate. When he didn't, she said, "What made you come up here?" "Wanted to get away from people." "Did it work?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, worked real well, until a bear decided I was trespassing and tried to kill me. The trapper said the attack happened 3 days ago." "Sounds right. Everything's kind of blurry. Do you remember what happened?" Rhett was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone flat, distant. "I was checking my trap line up near the ridge, heard something moving in the brush, figured it was a deer. Then the bear came out of nowhere, just exploded out of the trees like something had set it off. Didn't even give a warning, just attacked. Grizzlies usually avoid people. This one didn't." He shifted on the bed, wincing. It was already hurt, bleeding from its shoulder, wild-eyed. Something had wounded it before it got to me. Mara turned to look at him. "Someone shot it?" "Maybe. Or it got caught in a trap and tore free. I don't know. But it was already in pain and looking for something to kill." He touched his bandaged chest gingerly. "Found me." "How did you fight it off?" "Had my knife. Stuck it in the bear's neck until it let go and ran off." His expression darkened. "Barely made it back here before I passed out. Samuel, the trapper, found me the next day. Tried to patch me up, but he didn't know what he was doing. Neither did I. You're lucky to be alive. That what you call this?" Mara ladled broth into a tin cup and brought it to him. "Can you hold this, or do you need help?" He took the cup with his right hand, his left arm still too damaged to move much. He sipped carefully, and some of the tension eased from his face. "That's good. It's barely seasoned. Still good." He drank more, then looked at her over the rim of the cup. "You really rode through that storm last night?" "Yes." "Why?" "I already told you." "Tell me again." Mara sat down in one of the mismatched chairs, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. "Because you needed help. Because no one else would. Because it was the right thing to do." "That's not a reason." "It's the only reason I have." He studied her in that unnerving way of his, like he was trying to see past her words to something underneath. "What did they say when you volunteered?" "Does it matter?" "Yeah, it does." Mara looked down at her hands, still stained with his blood. "The sheriff said I'd die before sunrise, said I was too weak, too soft, said I'd slow down, fall off my horse, freeze in a ditch. The whole town agreed." "But you came anyway." "Yes, even though they thought you'd fail. Especially because they thought I'd fail." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. She took a breath, trying to steady herself. "I'm used to people underestimating me, but I'm tired of proving myself to people who will never see me as anything other than a burden." Rhett set the cup down on the small table beside the bed. "You're not a burden. You don't know me. I know you rode through a blizzard to save my life. I know you spent all night keeping me alive when anyone else would have given up. I know you're still here, even though you could have turned back a dozen times." He met her eyes. "That's not a burden. That's strength." Something in Mara's chest cracked open. She'd spent so long being told she wasn't enough, not strong enough, not thin enough, not pretty enough, not worth the effort. And here was this man, this stranger, looking at her like she'd done something extraordinary instead of something foolish. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not laughing at me." His expression softened. "Why would I laugh?" "Everyone else does." "Then everyone else is an idiot." Despite everything, Mara felt the corner of her mouth twitch. "You don't know the sheriff. He might take offense to that." "Don't care." Rhett shifted on the bed, trying to get comfortable and failing. "What's his name?" Dalton Vane. Something flickered across Rhett's face. Recognition, or maybe anger. I know him. You do? He's been up here before, a couple years back. Wanted to talk about land rights, boundaries, some legal nonsense I didn't care about. Rhett's jaw tightened. Kept hinting I should move on, find somewhere else to settle. Said this area wasn't safe for someone living alone. What did you tell him? Told him to get off my property. Mara couldn't help it. She smiled. I bet he loved that. He didn't. Rhett's expression darkened. He's been looking for a reason to run me out ever since. Probably thinks I'm some kind of threat. Are you? To him? Maybe. I don't follow his rules, don't bow and scrape when he shows up, don't pretend he's anything other than a man with a badge who likes throwing his weight around. Rhett looked at her. Men like Vane hate that. They need everyone to acknowledge their authority, or they don't know who they are. Mara thought about the way the sheriff had dismissed her in front of the crowd, the casual cruelty in his voice. He didn't want me to come up here. Because he wanted me to die. The bluntness of it startled her. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Rhett's voice was steady, certain. If I'm dead, he can claim my land. Say I abandoned it, or that I was a danger to travelers. Either way, he gets what he wants. What could he possibly want with land this remote? Mining rights. There's silver in these mountains? Not much, but enough. And there's a pass that runs through my property that would cut travel time to the northern settlements by 2 days. Vane's been trying to get control of this area for years. I'm just in his way. Mara absorbed this, unease settling in her stomach. If that's true, then me coming up here ruins his plan, Rhett finished. Yeah. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Finally, Mara said, Do you think the bear attack was really an accident? I've been thinking about that. Rhett's expression was grim. Bear was already wounded when it came at me, and grizzlies don't usually come this far down the mountain this time of year. They should be in their dens. So someone drove it toward you. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just paranoid from living alone too long. But he didn't sound like he believed that. Mara stood and checked his bandages again, more to give her hand something to do than out of medical necessity. The wounds looked better. Still angry and inflamed, but the worst of the infection seemed to be receding. You need to rest, get your strength back. How long before I can move around? Weeks? Maybe a month? Don't have that long. You don't have a choice. He grabbed her wrist, his grip weak but insistent. Listen to me. If Vane figures out I'm still alive, he's going to come back. And if he finds you here, he already knows I'm here. The whole town watched me leave. Then he's going to use you to get to me. Rhett's eyes were fierce despite his weakened state. He'll say I kidnapped you, or hurt you, or that you're in danger. He'll use it as an excuse to come up here with deputies and guns and what, kill you? Yes. The word hung between them, stark and terrible. Mara pulled her wrist free gently. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. Right now, you need to heal. I'm serious, Mara. So am I. She met his gaze. I didn't ride through a blizzard just to let you die because you were too stubborn to rest. So lie down, drink your broth, and let me do my job. For a moment she thought he might argue. Then he let out a long breath and sank back against the pillows. You're bossy. I'm a nurse. It comes with the territory. Fair enough. He closed his eyes, exhaustion overtaking him again. You should get some real sleep. You look like you're about to fall over. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar. Mara wanted to protest, but the truth was she could barely keep her eyes open. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was long gone, leaving only bone-deep weariness in its wake. Maybe for a little while. Take the bed. You're in the bed. It's big enough for 2, and you're not sleeping on the floor again. Heat crept up Mara's neck. That's not appropriate. Neither is dying of exhaustion. Rhett's voice was already fading, sleep pulling him under. Just lie down, Mara. I'm too tired to care about propriety. She hesitated, every rule of social convention screaming at her to refuse. But the bed did look warm and the floor was hard and cold, and she was so tired she could cry. Fine, she said, but you stay on your side. Deal. She unlaced her boots and climbed onto the other side of the bed, keeping as much distance between them as the narrow mattress allowed. The blanket smelled like smoke and pine, and the pillow was lumpy, but it felt like heaven after the night she'd had. "Mara?" Rhett's voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah?" "Thank you. For staying." "You already said that." "I meant it." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just closed her eyes. Within moments, sleep dragged her under like a tide. When she woke, the light had changed. It was late afternoon, maybe early evening. The fire had burned down to coals again, and the cabin had grown cold. Beside her, Rhett was still asleep, his breathing deep and even. Mara slipped out of bed carefully, trying not to disturb him. She rebuilt the fire, checked his bandages, and found herself at a loss for what to do next. She'd expected to ride back to town by now, but the thought of leaving felt wrong. Rhett was better, but he wasn't healed, and if what he'd said about the sheriff was true, then leaving might put him in more danger. She was still mulling this over when she heard horses outside. Her heart jumped into her throat. She moved to the window and peered through a gap in the shutters. 3 riders were approaching the cabin, their horses picking their way carefully through the snow. Even from a distance, she recognized Sheriff Vane's broad shoulders and the gleam of his badge. "Rhett?" she said urgently, moving back to the bed. "Wake up! Someone's here!" His eyes snapped open, instantly alert despite his injuries. "Who?" "Sheriff Vane. He's got 2 deputies with him." Rhett cursed under his breath and tried to sit up. Mara helped him, propping pillows behind his back so he at least looked upright and coherent. "Stay calm," she said. Let me do the talking." "He's not here to talk." "Then we'll figure it out." She squeezed his hand quickly, then moved to the door just as someone knocked. She opened it to find Sheriff Vane standing on the threshold, his expression a careful mask of concern. Behind him, 2 younger men, deputies she vaguely recognized from town, shifted nervously in their saddles. "Miss Whitlock," Vane said. "Thank goodness. We've been worried sick about you." "I'm fine, Sheriff." "Are you?" His eyes flicked past her to where Rhett sat on the bed. "We came to make sure you were safe." "As you can see, I'm perfectly safe." "With all due respect, that's not for you to decide." Vane took a step forward, and Mara instinctively moved to block the doorway. "We've had reports that Rhett Mercer can be dangerous, unstable. I need to make sure he hasn't harmed you." "The only harm Mr. Mercer has suffered was from a grizzly bear," Mara said firmly, "and I've been treating his injuries. He's in no condition to harm anyone." "All the same, I'd like to see for myself." "No." The word came out harder than she'd intended. Vane's expression flickered. Surprise, then irritation, then something colder. "Miss Whitlock, I'm trying to protect you." "I don't need protection." "You don't know what this man is capable of." "I know he's injured and recovering, and I know you rode all the way up here in dangerous conditions just to check on me." Mara crossed her arms. "That's very considerate, Sheriff, but as you can see, I'm fine. You can head back now." Vane's jaw tightened. Behind him, one of the deputies cleared his throat. "Sheriff, maybe we should—" "Quiet." Vane didn't take his eyes off Mara. "Miss Whitlock, there have been concerns. Questions about Mr. Mercer's character, about incidents in the past involving travelers who went missing in these mountains." "What incidents?" "That's not something we should discuss in front of him." From the bed, Rhett spoke up, his voice rough but steady. "You mean the trappers who disappeared 3 winters back? The ones who got caught in an avalanche near Widow's Peak?" Vane's expression hardened. "That was never proven." "Because their bodies were buried under 20 feet of snow. But everyone knows what happened. They tried to cross the pass during a storm and paid for it." Rhett's eyes were cold. "You trying to pin that on me now?" "I'm not trying to pin anything on anyone. I'm simply ensuring Miss Whitlock's safety." "Then you've done your job," Mara said. "I'm safe. Now please leave." Vane stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned his head slightly, addressing the deputies without looking away from her. "Make a note. Miss Whitlock refuses assistance and insists on remaining with Mr. Mercer of her own free will." "Sheriff, that's not necessary." "It's very necessary." He finally stepped back. "When you're ready to come home, Miss Whitlock, we'll be waiting. But don't expect us to come running if you find yourself in trouble." "I won't." He tipped his hat, the gesture somehow mocking. "Good luck then. You're going to need it." The 3 men mounted their horses and rode away, disappearing into the trees. Mara closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. That went well, Rhett said dryly. Mara let out a shaky laugh. He's going to make this difficult, isn't he? Yes. She turned to face him. What do we do? You go back to town, tonight, if you can make it before dark. Tell them I'm recovering and that you did your job. Let things settle. And you? I stay here. Heal up. Keep my head down. Mara shook her head. That won't work. You heard him. He's building a narrative. If I leave now, he'll twist it into something it's not. He'll say you threatened me or that I was too scared to tell the truth. Then what do you suggest? I stay. Rhett stared at her. You can't. Why not? Because it'll ruin your reputation. Because the town will turn on you. Because what? Mara moved closer to the bed. Because I'm supposed to care what people think? Because I'm supposed to go back to a place where I'm mocked and dismissed and treated like I don't matter? Mara, I'm tired, Rhett. The words spilled out before she could stop them. I'm so tired of pretending I'm fine when I'm not, of smiling when people insult me, of trying to earn respect from people who will never give it, and for what? So I can keep living in a town that sees me as a joke? This isn't about them, Rhett said quietly. This is about you being safe. I am safe. I'm safer here than I've ever been in Black Hollow Ridge. She sat down on the edge of the bed. You asked me why I came up here. The truth is, I didn't just come to save you. I came because I was hoping that maybe, just maybe, there was somewhere in this world where I could be seen as something other than a burden. And I found it. Here, with you. Rhett looked at her like she'd just said something incomprehensible. You don't know me. I know enough. I'm a mess, Mara. I live alone in the middle of nowhere because I can't stand being around people. I've got more scars than sense and a sheriff who wants me dead. You think that's better than what you had? Yes, she said simply. Because you see me. Not what I look like, not what people say about me. Just me. He didn't have an answer for that. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down like the snow outside. Finally, Rhett said, If you stay, things are going to get worse before they get better. I know. Vane's not going to let this go. I know that too. Then why? Mara looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the wariness in his eyes, the walls he'd built to keep people out, the loneliness he wore like a second skin. And she recognized all of it because she'd worn the same things herself for years. Because I'm tired of running, she said, and I think maybe you are too. Rhett held her gaze for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Okay. Okay. Stay. That's what you want. It is. Then we'll figure it out. He leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion catching up with him again. Together, Mara felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or the beginning of something that looked like belonging. Together, she agreed. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Inside the cabin, the fire burned steady and warm. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara Whitlock felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Mara tended to Rhett's wounds, changed his bandages twice daily, and made sure he ate even when he insisted he wasn't hungry. Rhett, for his part, healed slowly but steadily, his color returning, his strength building in small increments that felt like victories. They talked more than Mara expected, about small things at first, the weather, the animals that left tracks in the snow outside, the best way to cook dried venison. But gradually the conversations deepened, circling around the edges of harder truths before finally landing on them. Why'd you become a nurse? Rhett asked one evening while Mara was preparing their supper. She stirred the pot of beans, considering her answer. My mother was sick when I was young. Cancer, though we didn't know what to call it back then. We lived in Pennsylvania, and the nearest doctor was 2 towns over. By the time he came, it was too late. She paused, remembering. I was 12. I watched her die slowly, in pain, and I couldn't do anything to help. After that, I knew I wanted to learn, to be able to do something when people were hurting. That's a hard reason. Most good reasons are. She ladled beans into 2 bowls. What about you? How'd you end up here? Rhett was quiet for a long moment. Had a wife once, back in Missouri. Mara turned to look at him, surprised. He'd never mentioned anyone before. Her name was Catherine, he continued, his voice careful, like he was handling something fragile. We had a farm, nothing fancy, but it was ours. We were going to have kids, build a life. He stared at the fire. Then the war came. You fought? Yeah, 3 years. When I came back, she was gone. His jaw tightened. Cholera outbreak swept through the county while I was away. Took her and half the town. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. But the way he said it suggested it wasn't long enough. After that, I couldn't stay there. Couldn't look at that farm without seeing her everywhere. So I sold it, took what money I had, and headed west. Kept going until I ran out of reasons to stop. And you ended up here. And I ended up here. He looked at her. Figured if I couldn't have what I wanted, at least I could be left alone. Did it work? For a while. He shifted on the bed, wincing slightly. But being alone isn't the same as being at peace. Took me a long time to figure that out. Mara brought him his bowl and sat in the chair beside the bed. What changed? You showed up half frozen on my doorstep and wouldn't let me die. The corner of his mouth quirked up. Made it hard to keep pretending I was better off by myself. She felt heat creep into her cheeks. I was just doing my job. No, you weren't. Your job was in town, taking care of people who actually appreciated you. Coming up here was something else. What was it then? I don't know. He ate a spoonful of beans, thoughtful. But whatever it was, I'm glad you did it. They ate in comfortable silence after that. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. But inside the cabin, it was warm and quiet. Mara found herself thinking that she could get used to this. The simplicity of it, the lack of judgment, the feeling of being useful without constantly having to prove her worth. But the peace didn't last. 4 days after Sheriff Vane's visit, Samuel returned. Mara heard the knock and opened the door to find the trapper standing there, snow dusting his shoulders, his expression grim. Miss Whitlock, he said. We need to talk. She let him in. Rhett was sitting up in bed now, moving more easily, though still careful of his injuries. He nodded at Samuel in greeting. You look better, Samuel said. I am, thanks to Mara. That's good. That's real good. But Samuel's tone suggested there was nothing good about whatever he'd come to say. He looked at Mara. There's talk in town. What kind of talk? The bad kind. Sheriff's been spreading stories. Says Mercer here kidnapped you. Says you're being held against your will. Mara felt anger flare hot in her chest. That's a lie. I know it is. But that doesn't matter to folks who want to believe it. Samuel pulled off his hat, turning it in his hands. Vane's been real careful about it. Doesn't say it outright, just plants seeds. Asks questions. Wonders out loud why you haven't come back yet. Mentions how Mercer's got a history of violence. I don't have a history of violence, Rhett said flatly. Doesn't matter if it's true. People believe what they want to believe, and Vane knows it. Samuel looked between them. He's building a case, making sure everyone's good and worried about Miss Whitlock's safety. Then he's going to come back up here with more men, and he's going to use force. When? Mara asked. Soon. Maybe a week. Maybe less. He's waiting for the weather to clear and for enough people to get riled up that no one questions what he's doing. Rhett swore under his breath. He's going to claim he's rescuing you. And if I say I don't need rescuing? Won't matter, Samuel said. He'll say you're too scared to tell the truth, or that Mercer's got you convinced somehow. Either way, he gets what he wants. Which is what exactly? Mara demanded. To kill me, Rhett said bluntly, or arrest me on false charges and make sure I never come back to this mountain. Either way, my land becomes available, and Vane swoops in to claim it. Samuel nodded. That's about the size of it. Mara sank into the chair, her mind racing. So what do we do? You go back to town, Samuel said. Right now, before this gets worse, tell everyone you're fine, that Mercer never hurt you, that the whole thing's been a misunderstanding. They won't believe me. Maybe not everyone, but enough might. At least it'll make it harder for Vane to justify what he's planning. And what about Rhett? I stay here, Rhett said. Keep my head down. Hope Vane loses interest. He won't, Mara said. You know he won't. Then I'll deal with it when it happens. By yourself? You can barely walk 20 feet without needing to sit down. I'll manage." "That's not a plan. That's suicide." Mara stood pacing the small cabin. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Samuel said gently. "Not unless you want this to turn into a bloodbath." She wanted to argue, to find some solution they were all missing, but she couldn't. Samuel was right. Staying here was only going to make things worse. And yet the thought of going back to town, of leaving Rhett alone and vulnerable, made something in her chest twist painfully. "I'll go tomorrow," she said finally. "But I'm not abandoning you." Rhett opened his mouth to protest, but she cut him off. "I'm not. I'll go back. I'll tell everyone the truth, and I'll make it clear that if anyone comes up here looking for trouble, they're going to have to go through me first." "Morris, that's final." Samuel looked between them, something like understanding crossing his face. "I'll spread the word, too. Let folks know what really happened. Won't change everyone's mind, but it might help." "Thank you," Mara said. Samuel nodded, then pulled his hat back on. "I should get going before the weather turns again. You take care, Miss Whitlock. And Mercer. You stay alive, hear me?" "I'll try." After Samuel left, the cabin felt smaller somehow. Mara busied herself with cleaning, with reorganizing supplies, with anything that would keep her hands occupied and her mind from spiraling into worry. "You don't have to do this," Rhett said after a while. "Yes, I do." "Why?" She stopped what she was doing and turned to face him. "Because for the first time in my life, I found somewhere I want to be, and I'm not letting anyone take that away without a fight." "Even if it ruins you?" "I'm already ruined in their eyes. At least this way I get to choose what I'm ruined for." He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving across his face. "You're stubborn." "So are you." "That's different." "How?" "I'm used to fighting alone. You shouldn't have to be." Mara crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "Then maybe we fight together." "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." She reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers despite his injuries. "I'm saying I'm tired of living small. I'm tired of apologizing for taking up space. I'm tired of people treating me like I'm worth less than I am. And I'm saying that if standing beside you means the whole world turns against me, then so be it. At least I'll be standing for something real." Rhett's throat worked. "You barely know me. I know enough. What if I'm not worth it? What if you are?" She squeezed his hand. "What if we both are?" He pulled her closer then, his uninjured arm wrapping around her shoulders, and she let herself lean into him. They sat like that for a while, not speaking, just breathing together in the warm cabin while the wind howled outside. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Mara packed her medical bag, made sure Rhett had enough supplies to last a week, and left detailed instructions for caring for his wounds. She was stalling, and she knew it, but she couldn't quite make herself walk out the door. "I'll be fine," Rhett said, watching her fuss over the bandages for the third time. "I know." "Then stop worrying." "I can't." He caught her hand. "Mara, look at me." She did. His eyes were steady, clear, filled with something that looked almost like tenderness. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." "I'll be back," she promised. "I know." She wanted to say more, wanted to tell him that something had shifted in her chest over the past week, that she'd started looking forward to their conversations, that the thought of leaving him made her feel hollow inside. But the words wouldn't come, so she just nodded and headed for the door. The ride back to Black Hollow Ridge took longer than she expected. Mara stopped twice to rest Greta, using the time to rehearse what she'd say when she arrived. But no matter how she framed it in her mind, she knew it was going to be ugly. She was right. The moment she rode into town, people stopped what they were doing to stare. Whispers followed her down Main Street like a cloud of gnats. By the time she reached the livery stable, a crowd had gathered. Sheriff Vane pushed through to the front, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Whitlock, welcome back." "Sheriff, we were starting to worry about you." "I'm fine, as you can see." "Are you?" He looked her up and down, his gaze calculating. "You've been gone almost a week. That's a long time to be alone with a man like Mercer." "I wasn't alone with him," Mara said, keeping her voice steady. "I was treating his injuries, as a nurse." "Which is what I do." "Of course." Vane's smile didn't reach his eyes. But people have been concerned, wondering if maybe you weren't able to leave, if maybe Mercer made you stay. He didn't make me do anything. I stayed because he needed medical care, and I'm the only person qualified to provide it. She dismounted, her legs stiff from the ride. Mr. Mercer is recovering well. His wounds are healing, and he poses no danger to anyone. That's good to hear. Vane stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. But you should know there are questions about what really happened up there, about whether you're telling the whole truth. I am telling the truth. Maybe you are. Or maybe he's scared you into protecting him. Anger flared hot and sharp. I'm not scared of Rhett Mercer, and I'm not protecting him. I'm protecting the truth, which is that he's an injured man who nearly died because no one in this town cared enough to help him. She said it loud enough that the crowd heard. People shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. Vane's expression hardened. That's a serious accusation. It's a fact. I asked for help. No one volunteered, so I went alone and I saved a man's life. That's not a crime. That's medicine. No one's saying it's a crime, but the way he said it suggested he was thinking exactly that. We're just concerned about your reputation, about what people might think. What people think isn't my problem. It is if you want to keep working as a nurse in this town. The threat hung in the air, barely veiled. Mara felt her jaw tighten. Are you saying I'll lose my position if I don't condemn Rhett Mercer? I'm saying people need to trust their nurse. And right now, they're not sure they can trust someone who spent a week alone with a dangerous recluse and came back defending him. Then those people are idiots. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vane's face went red. Miss Whitlock, I'm done with this conversation. Mara grabbed her bag from the saddle. I've done my job. I've saved a life. If that's not good enough for you or anyone else in this town, then maybe I'm better off somewhere else. She pushed past him and headed toward her cabin at the edge of town. The crowd parted to let her through, their faces a mix of shock, judgment, and something that might have been grudging respect. When she reached her cabin, she slammed the door behind her and leaned against it, her hands shaking. She'd burned that bridge thoroughly. There was no going back now. Good, she thought. She didn't want to go back. Over the next 3 days, Mara felt the town turn against her completely. People who'd once nodded in greeting now crossed the street to avoid her. Mrs. Gaines refused to sell her supplies. When old Mrs. Callahan's cough got worse, her son came to the door and told Mara her services were no longer needed. Find another nurse, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. There is no other nurse. Then we'll manage without one. The door closed in her face. Mara stood there for a moment, feeling the sting of rejection settle into her bones like cold. This was it then. This was the price of standing up for what was right. She went back to her cabin and started packing. She didn't have much, some clothes, her medical supplies, a few books, a tintype of her mother. It all fit into 2 saddlebags with room to spare. A whole life, compressed into a couple of bags. It should have felt tragic, but instead it felt liberating. She was nearly finished when someone knocked on her door. She opened it to find Samuel standing there, along with 2 other trappers she vaguely recognized. Miss Whitlock, Samuel said, we heard what happened. News travels fast. It does in a small town. He shifted his weight. We wanted you to know, not everyone agrees with Vane. Some of us know what really happened, and we appreciate what you did for Mercer. One of the other trappers, a lean, weathered man with gray in his beard, nodded. Rhett saved my life 2 winters back. Pulled me out of a frozen river when I fell through the ice. If he says you're good people, that's enough for us. Mara felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you. That means more than you know. Vane's planning something, Samuel said quietly. He's gathering men, talking about forming a posse to go up to Mercer's cabin. Says it's for your protection, but we all know what he really wants. When? Day after tomorrow, most likely. He's waiting for a few more men to agree to ride with him. How many? 6, maybe 7, all armed. Mara's mind raced. I need to warn Rhett. We figured you'd say that. Samuel gestured to the other trappers. That's why we're here. We'll ride with you. Make sure you get there safe, and then we'll stay. Help Mercer however we can. You do that? Some debts you don't forget, the gray-bearded man said. And some fights are worth having, even if you lose. Mara wanted to hug them, but she settled for a firm nod instead. Give me 10 minutes to finish packing. They left at first light the next morning, the four of them riding north in silence. The trail was clearer now, the worst of the winter storms having passed. But the cold was still brutal. Mara's breath fogged in the air, and ice crystals clung to Greta's mane. When they reached the cabin, Rhett was outside, splitting wood despite the fact that he shouldn't have been doing anything that strenuous. He looked up at the sound of horses, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the cabin wall. Then he saw Mara, and relief flooded his face. "You came back." "I told you I would." She dismounted and crossed to him. "And I brought help." She introduced him to the trappers, and Rhett shook each man's hand, something like gratitude in his eyes. "You didn't have to do this." "Yeah, we did," Samuel said. "Besides, we're not letting Vane run roughshod over the mountains just because he's got a badge." They moved inside, and Mara explained everything. The town's rejection, Vane's plans, the posse that would arrive within the next 2 days. Rhett listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each detail. "This is my fault," he said when she finished. "I should have told you to leave that first night. Should have known this would happen." "It's not your fault," Mara said firmly. "This is Vane's doing, not yours. And it was my choice to stay. A choice that's cost you everything." "It hasn't cost me everything. It's cost me a town that never valued me anyway." She met his eyes. "But it gave me something worth fighting for." Rhett stared at her, something raw and vulnerable crossing his face. "You're really going to do this? Stand here and fight when you could just walk away?" "I'm not walking away." "Even if we lose?" "Even then." He reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing her cheek. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most foolish. Maybe both." And then he kissed her. It was brief, tentative, like he was afraid she might pull away. But Mara leaned into it, her hands finding his shoulders, her heart hammering against her ribs. When they broke apart, she saw the same surprise in his eyes that she felt in her chest. "Sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have—" "Yes, you should have." She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in days. "You absolutely should have." Behind them, Samuel cleared his throat loudly. "Not to interrupt, but we've got a sheriff on his way who wants to kill us all. Maybe we should focus on that?" Rhett laughed, actually laughed, and Mara felt hope flare bright and warm in her chest. "Right," Rhett said. "Let's figure out how to survive this." They spent the rest of the day preparing. The trappers helped Rhett reinforce the cabin's door and shutters, while Mara took stock of supplies and made sure everyone had enough water and food to last through a siege if it came to that. They cleaned weapons, checked ammunition, and planned defensive positions. It felt surreal, preparing for violence in a place that had been so peaceful just days ago. But Mara pushed down her fear and focused on the work. This was happening. They couldn't stop it. All they could do was be ready. That night, sitting around the fire with Rhett and the trappers, Mara felt something shift inside her. She'd spent her whole life trying to fit into a world that didn't want her, trying to be smaller, quieter, less of a burden, and it had never worked. But here, in this cabin, surrounded by men who saw her as an equal, preparing to fight for something real, here she felt like she finally belonged. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "thank you, all of you, for seeing me." Rhett's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers lacing through hers. "We see you, Mara, and we're not letting you go." The horses came at dawn 2 days later, their hoofbeats muffled by fresh snow but unmistakable to anyone listening for them. Mara was already awake, had been for hours, sitting by the window with a cup of lukewarm coffee she couldn't bring herself to drink. Beside her, Rhett stood motionless, his rifle in hand, his jaw tight. 7 riders, Samuel said from the other window. Vane's in front. Armed? All of them. Rhett glanced at Mara. Last chance to go out there and tell them this was all a mistake. No. You could still... I said no. She set down the cup and stood. We do this together. The riders stopped about 30 yards from the cabin, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Sheriff Vane dismounted, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. The other men stayed in their saddles, rifles visible, but not yet raised. Rhett Mercer, Vane called out. We need to talk. Rhett opened the door but didn't step outside. Then talk. I'm here for Miss Whitlock. We have reason to believe she's being held against her will. I'm not, Mara said, moving to stand beside Rhett in the doorway. I've told you that already. Vane's expression didn't change. Miss Whitlock, you need to understand your position. You've been isolated up here for over 2 weeks. It's possible you're confused about your situation, that you've been manipulated or threatened into compliance. I haven't been manipulated, and I haven't been threatened. I'm here because I choose to be. That's not what the town believes. The town can believe whatever it wants. Mara crossed her arms. I'm staying here. Now leave. I can't do that. Vane's voice hardened. I have a legal obligation to ensure your safety, and I have credible reports that Mercer here has a history of violence toward women. That's a lie, Rhett said flatly. Is it? Vane pulled a folded paper from his coat. I have a sworn statement from a woman in Silverton who claims you assaulted her 4 years ago. Let me see that. You'll see it when we get to town, after you've been properly arrested. Rhett's hand tightened on his rifle. I've never been to Silverton, and I've never assaulted anyone. That's for a court to decide. Vane gestured to his deputies. We're taking you in, Mercer. You can come peacefully, or we can do this the hard way. You're not taking him anywhere, Mara said. This is a setup, and everyone knows it. Miss Whitlock, step away from him. Now. No. Vane's patience visibly frayed. I'm trying to help you. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're not trying to help me. You're trying to steal his land, and you're using me as an excuse. Mara's voice rose, carrying across the clearing. You've been waiting for an opportunity to get rid of him, and when he got hurt, you thought you'd finally have your chance. But he didn't die. I saved him. And that ruined your plans. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. One of the deputies shifted in his saddle, looking uncomfortable. Sheriff, maybe we should... Quiet. Vane didn't take his eyes off Mara. Miss Whitlock, I'm giving you one more chance. Come out here voluntarily, or I'll have my men remove you by force. Touch her and you'll regret it, Rhett said quietly. Is that a threat? It's a promise. The tension stretched thin and dangerous. Mara could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, could see the deputies' hands moving toward their weapons. This was about to turn violent, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Then Samuel stepped into the doorway beside them, his rifle raised. You might want to reconsider, Sheriff. The gray-bearded trapper appeared at the corner of the cabin, weapon ready. The third trapper moved into position on the other side. Suddenly, the odds didn't look so good for Vane's posse. You're interfering with the law, Vane said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. The law, Samuel repeated. That what you're calling this? Because from where I'm standing, it looks more like an attempted murder dressed up with a badge. I could have all of you arrested for obstruction. You could try. Samuel's voice was calm but firm. But you'd have to explain to a judge why you brought 7 armed men up a mountain to arrest 1 injured man on charges no one's ever heard of before, and why 4 witnesses are willing to testify that you've been planning this for weeks. Vane's face darkened. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? We know about the mining rights. We know you've been trying to force Mercer off this land for years. We know that bear attack wasn't as random as you wanted everyone to believe. That's speculation. Maybe, but it's the kind of speculation that makes people ask questions. And once people start asking questions, all sorts of interesting things come to light. Samuel lowered his rifle slightly, though he kept it ready. Here's what's going to happen, Sheriff. You're going to take your men and ride back to town. You're going to tell everyone that Miss Whitlock is fine, that she's staying here of her own free will, and that Rhett Mercer is not a threat to anyone. And then you're going to leave him alone. Or what? Or we make sure everyone from here to Silverton knows exactly what you've been doing. The land schemes, the false charges, the intimidation, all of it. Samuel's expression was hard. You think you're the only one with connections, Vane? I've got friends in territorial government who'd be real interested to hear about a corrupt sheriff abusing his authority. The bluff hung in this cold air. Mara held her breath, watching Vane's face, seeing the calculation behind his eyes. He was weighing his options, trying to decide if he could still win this. One of the deputies cleared his throat. Sheriff, this ain't what you said it would be. I said be quiet. No, I think he's got a point, another deputy said. We came up here to rescue a woman in distress. But she don't look distressed to me. She looks like she's made her choice. She's been manipulated. She's standing right there calling you a liar to your face, the first deputy interrupted. That don't sound like someone who's scared or confused. Vane turned on them, anger flashing in his eyes. You're questioning my judgment? I'm questioning whether I want to get shot over land I don't have any stake in, the deputy said bluntly. You said this was about protecting Miss Whitlock, but it's starting to look like something else entirely. If you're not with me, then leave. The deputy glanced at his companion, then back at Vane. Maybe we will. He turned his horse and started back down the trail. After a moment's hesitation, 2 other deputies followed. That left Vane with only 3 men, and suddenly the numbers had shifted decisively against him. Vane's hand moved toward his gun. This isn't over. Yeah, it is. Rhett's voice was cold. You lost, Vane. Go home. For a long moment, Mara thought Vane might actually draw. His hand hovered over the revolver, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. But then he seemed to realize how badly this had turned against him, and his hand dropped. You think you've won, he said, his voice low and venomous. But you've just made yourself an enemy you can't afford to have. Both of you. We'll manage, Mara said. Vane stared at her with something close to hatred. You had a place in that town, respect, a future, and you threw it all away for him. He spat the last word like a curse. You deserve what's coming. Maybe I do. Mara stepped forward, moving past Rhett onto the porch. But at least I'll face it standing up instead of on my knees begging people like you for scraps of basic human decency. Vane's jaw worked, but he had no response. He swung back into his saddle, jerked his horse around, and rode off without another word. His remaining 3 men followed, none of them looking back. The silence after they left felt enormous. Mara realized she was shaking, adrenaline and relief mixing into something that made her knees weak. Rhett's hand found her elbow, steadying her. You all right? Yeah, I think so. She turned to Samuel and the other trappers. Thank you. If you hadn't been here. Don't mention it. Samuel lowered his rifle and let out a long breath. That was closer than I'd like. Vane's not going to forget this. No, he's not, the gray-bearded trapper agreed. But at least we bought you some time, and we got witnesses now who saw what he tried to do. That'll make it harder for him to come back. Will he come back? Mara asked. Eventually, Rhett said. Men like Vane don't give up when they've been humiliated. They just get more dangerous. The trapper stayed another day, helping Rhett set up better defenses around the cabin and making sure word spread to the other mountain settlements about what had happened. By the time they left, Mara felt marginally more secure, though she knew the threat hadn't truly passed. That night, alone with Rhett again, Mara found herself unable to settle. She paced the cabin, checked the window bolts twice, jumped at every sound from outside. Finally, Rhett caught her hand and pulled her down to sit beside him. Talk to me, he said. I don't know what to say. Tell me what you're thinking. Mara looked at their joined hands, at the contrast between his calloused fingers and her smaller, softer ones. I'm thinking that I've burned every bridge behind me, that there's no going back even if I wanted to, that I've bet everything on this, on you, on something I can't even name. And I don't know if I made the right choice. Do you regret it? She met his eyes. No, that's what scares me. I should regret it. I should feel like I made a mistake. But I don't. I just feel like I finally did something true. Rhett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I've been alone for a long time. So long that I forgot what it felt like to want someone around, to look forward to hearing another person's voice, or seeing them smile, or just knowing they're there. He paused, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. And then you showed up half frozen and stubborn as hell, and you looked at me like I was worth saving, and something I thought was dead woke up. Rhett, Kamas, Mata. I'm not good at this, he continued, the talking about feelings part. But you need to know that what you gave up, it means something. It means everything. And I'm going to spend however long it takes making sure you never regret it. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. I'm scared. Me too. What if Vane comes back? What if he brings more men, or waits until we're not expecting it, or then we'll deal with it? Rhett pulled her closer. Together. That's what you said, right? Together. Yeah. She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. Together. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just being. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled and the shadows danced, and Mara felt something inside her settle into place. The next few weeks passed in a strange sort of peace. Rhett healed more each day, his strength returning, his movements growing less careful. Mara established a routine of sorts, tending to the cabin, cooking, caring for the few animals Rhett kept, a horse, some chickens, a goat that provided milk. It was simple work, physical and immediate, and she found herself taking satisfaction in it that she'd never found in nursing. Or maybe it wasn't the work itself. Maybe it was the fact that she was doing it for someone who actually appreciated it. They talked more during those weeks than Mara had talked to anyone in years. About everything and nothing. About the past they'd left behind and the future that felt uncertain but possible. About small things, like how Rhett preferred his coffee and why Mara hated beans but ate them anyway. About bigger things, like what it meant to choose your own life instead of living the one other people expected from you. And slowly, carefully, they circled around the thing that was growing between them. Not naming it yet, but acknowledging it in small ways. In the way Rhett's hand would find hers when they sat by the fire. In the way Mara leaned into him when they walked outside together. In the way they'd started sharing the bed without any pretense of propriety, finding comfort in the closeness, even when nothing else happened. One evening, about 3 weeks after Vane's attempted raid, Rhett looked up from the knife he was sharpening and said, "You ever think about what comes next?" Mara glanced up from the sock she was mending. "What do you mean?" "I mean after all this. After Vane either gives up or tries again and fails. After things settle. What do you want?" It was a question no one had ever asked her before. What do you want? Not what should you do, or what's proper, or what makes sense. Just what do you want? "I don't know," she said slowly. "I've never let myself think that far ahead. I was always so focused on just surviving, on proving I was useful, that I never considered there might be more than that." "There's more than that. Is there?" "Yeah." He set down the knife. "There's building something, making a life that's yours instead of just enduring the one you got handed. There's choosing to be somewhere because you want to be there, not because you've got nowhere else to go." Mara set aside her mending. "Is that what you've been doing up here? Building a life?" "I thought I was. But looking back, I think I was just hiding." He looked at her. "There's a difference." "What changed?" "You." He said it simply, like it was obvious. "Before you showed up, I was just existing, going through the motions, surviving but not really living, and then you came crashing in and suddenly I had a reason to want to survive, to want more than just making it through another winter." Mara's throat tightened. "I don't know if I can be that for someone. That reason. You already are. But what if I'm not enough? What if I..." "Stop." Rhett moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "You spent your whole life being told you weren't enough, that you were too much of some things and not enough of others, that you had to apologize for existing. And it was all lies, Mara. All of it. You don't know that. I do know that, because I see you. Not what you look like, not what people say about you. I see who you are. And who you are is someone strong enough to ride through a blizzard to save a stranger. Someone brave enough to stand up to an armed sheriff when it would have been easier to walk away. Someone stubborn enough to choose the hard path because it was the right one." His hands tightened on hers. "That's not enough. That's everything." A tear slipped down Mara's cheek. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Be loved. Be wanted. Be someone's reason." She wiped at her face with her free hand. "I've never had that before. I don't know the rules." "There are no rules." Rhett's thumb brushed away another tear. "There's just us, figuring it out as we go. What if we mess it up? Then we mess it up, and then we fix it. That's what people do." Mara let out a shaky laugh. "You make it sound so simple." "But it is simple. Not easy, but simple." He leaned his forehead against hers. "I want you here, Mara. Not because you're useful, or because I need a nurse, or because I'm lonely. I want you here because you're you. And if you want to stay, then stay. And if you want to leave, I'll understand. But whatever you choose, know that it's your choice, no one else's. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of that freedom, her choice, her life, her future. After spending so many years having those things dictated by other people's opinions and limitations, the idea of actually choosing felt both terrifying and exhilarating. "I want to stay," she whispered. "You sure?" "Yes. Even though it means living in the middle of nowhere with a man who barely talks to other people and has a sheriff who wants him dead? Especially because of that." She opened her eyes and found him watching her with something soft and vulnerable in his expression. "Because nowhere else have I ever felt like I belonged, like I mattered, like I was seen." She touched his face, feeling the rough texture of his beard, the warmth of his skin. "I want to stay, Rhett. I want to build something here, with you." He kissed her then, and it was different from the first time. Less tentative, more certain, a promise being made without words. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Okay," he said, "then we build." The next morning, Mara woke to find Rhett already up, standing at the window, his posture tense. She sat up, instantly alert. "What is it?" "Smoke. To the south." She joined him at this window. In the distance, barely visible through the trees, a thin column of smoke rose into the gray sky. Too much to be a campfire, too controlled to be a wildfire. "Could be trappers," she said, though she didn't sound convinced. "Could be." Rhett grabbed his rifle. "Or it could be Vane. He wouldn't be stupid enough to come back so soon. Wouldn't he? He's been humiliated. Men like that don't think straight when their pride's wounded." Rhett checked the rifle's load. "I'm going to check it out. Not alone. Mara, we do this together, remember?" She grabbed her coat. "I'm coming with you." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. "Fine. But you stay behind me, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" "Understood." They moved carefully through the forest, Rhett in front, Mara close behind. The smoke grew thicker as they approached, and with it came the smell of burning wood and something else. Something chemical. They crested a small rise and stopped. Below them, in a clearing Mara recognized as part of Rhett's trapline, a small structure was burning. It had been some kind of shelter or storage shed, and now it was engulfed in flames. "That's mine," Rhett said quietly. "I built that last fall to store supplies." "It's a message." "Yeah." His jaw clenched. "It is." They circled the burning structure, looking for any sign of who'd set it, but whoever had done this was long gone. Rhett kicked at something in the snow, then bent to pick it up. It was a piece of cloth, singed at the edges, with something written on it in crude letters. "Leave or burn." Mara felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "He's not going to stop." "No, he's not." Rhett stared at the burning shed, flames reflecting in his eyes. "He can't force me out legally, so now he's going to try fear." "What do? "We don't give him what he wants." Rhett crumpled the cloth in his fist. "We stay, we build, and we make damn sure he knows we're not going anywhere." They walked back to the cabin in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Mara went to work securing the outbuildings while Rhett checked their water supply and made sure the livestock were safe. They worked separately but in tandem, each understanding what needed to be done without having to speak it aloud. That night, as they sat by the fire, Mara said, "This is going to get worse before it gets better, isn't it?" "Probably." "Are we being stupid? Staying here when someone's literally trying to burn us out?" Rhett considered the question seriously. "Maybe. But if we leave, where do we go? Back to a town that doesn't want you? Somewhere new where we'd have to start from nothing and hope no one asks questions about why we left?" He shook his head. "At least here, we know what we're fighting for." "Each other," Mara said quietly. "Each other," he agreed, "and the right to live without bowing to someone else's threats." Mara moved closer to him, tucking herself against his side. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and they sat watching the fire, both understanding that the hard part wasn't over, that in some ways it was just beginning. But they also understood that they'd already made their choice, and whatever came next, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. The attacks continued over the next month. each one calculated to cause maximum disruption without direct confrontation. A trap line cut and destroyed. Fences torn down, letting the chickens scatter into the forest where foxes picked them off one by one. The goat found dead one morning, no visible wounds but clearly poisoned. Each incident was designed to send a message: leave or lose everything piece by piece. But Rhett and Mara rebuilt what was destroyed. They reinforced what remained, and they refused to break. "He's trying to wear us down," Rhett said one evening, surveying the remains of another damaged trapline. "Make us so tired and frustrated that we give up." "Is it working?" Mara asked. "No." He looked at her. "Is it working on you?" "No." They both knew they were lying, at least a little. The constant vigilance was exhausting. The lack of sleep, the jumping at every sound, the knowledge that someone was out there watching and waiting for the right moment to strike harder. It took a toll neither of them wanted to admit. But they also knew that admitting defeat would be worse. What they didn't expect was help arriving from an unexpected direction. It started with Samuel showing up one afternoon with news. "Word's spreading," he said, warming his hands by the fire, "about what Vane's been doing up here. The burning, the sabotage, all of it." "Let me guess," Rhett said. "No one cares." "Actually, some people do." Samuel pulled out a folded newspaper from his coat. "This is from Silverton. That reporter who's been writing about territorial corruption? He got wind of your situation." Mara took the paper and read the headline. "Sheriff accused of campaign of intimidation against mountain residents." The article detailed Vane's attempts to force Rhett off his land, included testimony from the deputies who'd refused to participate in the raid, and raised questions about other properties Vane had acquired under suspicious circumstances. "This is—" Mara looked up, surprised. "This is actually damaging to him." "It gets better," Samuel said. "Turns out Vane's been doing this kind of thing for years. Small scale, nothing anyone could prove, but enough that people were starting to notice patterns. This just brought it all into the light." "So what happens now?" Rhett asked. "Territorial governor's sending someone to investigate. Should be here within the month." Samuel grinned. "Vane's scrambling. He knows if this investigation finds anything, he's done." "Which means he's going to get desperate," Mara said. The smile faded from Samuel's face. "Yeah, that's what I'm worried about too." They didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, just after sunset, Mara was outside checking on the remaining chickens when she heard horses. Too many horses, moving too fast. She dropped the feed bucket and ran for the cabin. "Rhett, they're coming!" He was already at the window, rifle in hand. Through the gathering darkness, Mara could see torches. At least 10 riders, maybe more, surrounding the cabin in a wide circle. "Listen up, Mercer!" Vane's voice carried across the clearing, amplified by rage and desperation. "You've got one chance to end this peacefully. Come out with your hands up, and I'll take you in for questioning. Resist, and we'll burn you out." "On what charges?" Rhett called back. "Assault, arson, threatening an officer of the law. Take your pick." "Those are lies, and you know it." "That's for a judge to decide. Now come out, or I start lighting fires." Mara moved to stand beside Rhett. "He's not going to let you make it to any judge." "I know." Rhett's expression was grim. "The moment I step outside, I'm dead. He'll claim I was armed, that I threatened him, that it was self-defense." "So what do we do?" "We hold out. Hope he's not actually crazy enough to burn us alive." "And if he is?" Rhett didn't answer. Outside, Vane was growing impatient. "You've got 60 seconds, Mercer. After that, we start with the outbuildings." 60 seconds isn't a lot of time to make peace with dying," Mara said quietly. "No, it's not." Rhett took her hand. "I'm sorry for all of this. For dragging you into something that's going to get you killed." "You didn't drag me into anything. I chose this, remember?" "Still sorry." "Don't be." She squeezed his hand. "I'd rather die here with you than live another 40 years in that town being treated like I don't matter." Before Rhett could respond, they heard more horses. Different ones, coming from the north. The torches shifted, confusion rippling through Vane's men as the new arrivals appeared out of the darkness. Samuel rode at the head of a group of about 15 men, trappers, hunters, a few ranchers Mara vaguely recognized from the settlements beyond Black Hollow Ridge. They positioned themselves between Vane's group and the cabin, their weapons visible but not raised. "That's far enough, Vane," Samuel called out. The sheriff wheeled his horse around. "This doesn't concern you." It concerns all of us when a lawman abuses his authority. Samuel gestured to the men flanking him. We're here to make sure this gets handled properly, which means no burning, no shooting, and no lynching. I'm conducting a legal arrest. With 10 armed men and torches? That's not an arrest. That's a mob. Samuel's voice hardened. And we're not letting it happen. You're interfering with the law. The law, one of the ranchers spoke up, doesn't include burning people out of their homes. My spread's not far from here, and if you think I'm going to sit back and watch you set that precedent, you're out of your mind. Another voice added, I read that newspaper article, Vane, about all the properties you've somehow acquired over the years. Makes a man wonder how many other cabins you've burned to get what you want. Vane's horse sidled nervously, picking up on its rider's agitation. Those are lies spread by people who want to undermine legitimate authority. Then prove it, Samuel said. Let the territorial investigator do his job. If Mercer's committed crimes, he'll face justice, but through proper legal channels, not through whatever this is. I don't answer to you. Maybe not. But you do answer to the territorial government, and they're watching now. Every move you make, every decision. You really want to add mass murder to the list of things they're investigating? The standoff stretched taut. Mara held her breath, watching through the window as Vane calculated his options. She could see the rage in his posture, the desperation in the way his hand kept moving toward his gun and then away again. Finally, one of Vane's own deputies spoke up. Sheriff, maybe we should— Shut up. Vane's voice was vicious. All of you, shut up and let me think. But there was nothing to think about. He'd lost. The numbers were against him, witnesses were everywhere, and any violence now would destroy whatever shred of legitimacy he had left. This isn't over, Vane said finally, his voice carrying pure hatred. You hear me, Mercer. This isn't over. Yeah, it is, Rhett said from the cabin door. He'd stepped out onto the porch, rifle held loosely but ready. You lost the moment you made this personal instead of professional. You lost when you let your greed make you stupid, and you lost when you underestimated how many people were paying attention. I'll destroy you. You can try. But I think you'll be too busy trying to keep yourself out of prison. Rhett's expression was cold. That investigator's going to find things, Vane. All the properties you've stolen, all the people you've intimidated, all the laws you've broken. And when he does, the only place you'll be sheriffing is a cell. Vane jerked his horse around so violently it reared. Let's go, he snarled at his men. They rode off into the darkness, torches guttering in their wake, leaving only the smell of smoke and fear behind. Samuel dismounted and approached the cabin. You all right? We are now, Mara said, stepping out onto the porch beside Rhett. Thank you. If you hadn't shown up, we'd have been dead, Rhett finished. Probably. Samuel looked back at the assembled men. Word got out about what Vane was planning. Folks decided they'd had enough of watching him operate without consequences. The gray-bearded trapper joined them. Also figured we owed you. You've helped most of us at one time or another, Mercer. Seemed like a good time to return the favor. Over the next hour, the group dispersed, each man heading back to his own home or camp. But before they left, several came up to speak to Rhett and Mara personally, to shake hands, to offer support, to make it clear that they weren't alone. After everyone had gone, Rhett and Mara stood on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. The crisis had passed, at least for now, but they both knew the larger battle wasn't quite finished. Do you think Vane will actually face consequences? Mara asked. I think he'll face something. Whether it's enough? Rhett shrugged. Men like him have a way of slipping through cracks. But at least he won't be sheriff much longer. That's something. It's more than something. It's justice. Maybe. Or maybe it's just luck and timing. He turned to look at her. Either way, we survived. We did. Mara leaned against him. Now what? Now we live. It sounded so simple when he said it like that. Just live. But Mara was starting to understand that living, actually living, not just surviving or enduring, was perhaps the most radical thing either of them could do. The territorial investigator arrived 2 weeks later, a sharp-eyed man named Garrett, who spent 3 days interviewing witnesses and reviewing records. Mara and Rhett told their story, as did Samuel and the trappers and several of the deputies who'd refused to participate in Vane's schemes. When Garrett finally came back to the cabin to deliver his findings, his expression was grim. I've seen a lot of corruption in my time, But Dalton Vane is exceptional. He's been systematically stealing land and intimidating residents for at least 5 years, possibly longer. What happens to him? Mara asked. He's been arrested and removed from office. He'll stand trial in Silverton come spring. Garrett paused. I want to be clear. We might not get convictions on everything. Some of the evidence is circumstantial, some witnesses are scared to testify. But at minimum, he'll never wear a badge again. That's enough, Rhett said. Is it? Garrett studied him. He tried to have you killed multiple times, and he failed. I'm still here, still breathing, still living on my land. That's victory enough for me. After Garrett left, promising to send word when the trial date was set, Mara and Rhett found themselves with something they hadn't had in months. Peace. Real peace. Not the tense waiting for the next attack. The knowledge that they could sleep without one eye open, that they could work without constantly watching their backs. It was unsettling at first. Mara caught herself jumping at shadows, spinning around at unexpected sounds. The habit of vigilance didn't fade quickly, but gradually, as winter turned toward spring, they began to relax, to plan for the future instead of just surviving the present. Rhett expanded his trap lines. Mara started a small garden in the clearing near the cabin. They talked about building another room onto the cabin, about getting more livestock, about the possibility of trading goods with the settlements to the north. They also talked, carefully and with some embarrassment, about making their arrangement permanent. People are going to talk, Mara said one evening as they worked together preparing supper. About us living here together, unmarried. Let them talk. I'm serious, Rhett. It'll affect how people treat us, whether they'll do business with us. Do you care? She considered the question honestly. A few months ago, I would have. I would have cared desperately what people thought, what they said behind my back. But now? She shook her head. Now I mostly just feel sorry for people whose lives are so small that other people's choices matter that much to them. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. She looked at him. Do you want to marry me? Is that what this conversation is about? Rhett stopped chopping vegetables and set down the knife. I want you to stay. However that looks, whatever we call it. I want to wake up and know you're here. I want to build something with you that's ours. If that means marriage, fine. If it means something else, that's fine too. You're really bad at proposals, you know that? I'm not proposing. I'm just... He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I'm trying to say that I love you, and I don't care what people call it or how we formalize it. I just care that you're here. Mara felt warmth spread through her chest. You love me? Yeah. Even though I'm stubborn and difficult and have a habit of arguing with you? Especially because of that. And you know I'm not perfect, right? That living with me full-time is probably going to reveal all sorts of annoying habits and flaws? I'm counting on it. He moved closer. Perfect sounds exhausting. I'd rather have real. Real, Mara repeated. Yeah, I can do real. She reached up and touched his face. And for the record, I love you too. Even though you're grumpy and antisocial and eat too loudly. I do not eat too loudly. You absolutely do. He kissed her to shut her up, and she laughed against his mouth, and it felt like coming home. They got married that spring in a ceremony so small it barely counted. Samuel officiated since he'd somehow gotten himself ordained years back for reasons he never fully explained. The only other witnesses were the gray-bearded trapper and his wife, who'd ridden 2 days to attend and brought a venison roast as a gift. There were no flowers, no fancy dress, no guests from town, just a simple exchange of vows in the clearing behind the cabin, with the mountains as their witnesses and the sky bright and endless above them. I promise to see you, Rhett said when it was his turn. To keep seeing you, even on the days when we're both tired and frustrated and wondering why we thought this was a good idea. To choose you every day, not because it's easy, but because it matters. Mara's throat was tight when she responded. I promise to stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because there's nowhere else I want to be. To fight beside you when things get hard, and to remind you that you're worth fighting for when you forget. Samuel pronounced them married, and they kissed while the trappers cheered, and that was it. They were husband and wife, bound not by what anyone else thought or said, but by their own choice, their own commitment. The celebration afterward was modest, the venison roast, some whiskey Samuel had brought, Stories around the fire as the sun set and the stars came out. Simple and perfect in its simplicity. You know, Samuel said at one point, slightly drunk and sentimental, when I first brought word of Mercer's attack to town, I never imagined this would be the outcome. What did you imagine? Mara asked. That Mercer would die, honestly. Or that you'd try to save him and fail, and we'd have 2 funerals instead of 1. He raised his cup. I'm damn glad I was wrong. So am I, Rhett said quietly, his hand finding Mara's under the rough wool blanket they shared. After the guests left and the cabin was quiet again, Mara and Rhett sat together on the porch, watching the moon rise over the mountains. The world felt vast and full of possibility. What are you thinking? Rhett asked. I'm thinking about how strange life is. How 6 months ago I was the town joke, living in a cabin barely bigger than a closet, treating people who barely tolerated me. And now I'm married to a mountain man in the middle of nowhere, and I've never been happier. You're happy? Deliriously. She looked at him. Are you? Yeah. He said it like it surprised him. I spent 12 years up here convincing myself I didn't need anyone. That being alone was the same as being at peace. And I believed it right up until you stumbled in half frozen and started ordering me around. I didn't order you around. You absolutely did. Still do. But he was smiling. And I love it. I love that you're not afraid to push back. That you see me as an equal instead of some dangerous recluse. I love that you chose this life knowing exactly how hard it would be. I chose you, Mara corrected. The life just came with it. Same thing. Maybe. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Mara said, I've been thinking about something. About maybe turning part of the cabin into a proper medical space. There are people up here, trappers, families in the northern settlements, who don't have easy access to medical care. I could help them. You want to be a frontier nurse? I want to be useful, but on my terms this time. Helping people who actually appreciate it, not people who tolerate me because they have no choice. I think that's a good idea. Rhett squeezed her hand. We'd need to expand the cabin, maybe build a separate room with better light and space for supplies. You'd help with that? Of course. We're partners, remember? Your work is our work. Mara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears. Grateful tears. Thank you. For what? For seeing me. For making me believe I'm worth more than people said I was. You always were worth more, Rhett said. You just needed to be somewhere that reflected that truth back at you. Over the following months, word spread through the northern territories about the nurse who'd set up practice in the mountains. People started showing up, trappers with infected wounds, families with sick children, a prospector who'd broken his leg and needed it set properly. Mara treated them all, and most paid with whatever they had. Fresh meat, vegetables, firewood, labor helping to expand the cabin. The medical room became a reality by midsummer, a clean, well-lit space with shelves for supplies and a proper examination table Rhett built from scratch. Mara hung a sign outside that simply read, "Medical care available, all welcome." And people came, not just for treatment, but for conversation, for advice, for the simple human connection that was scarce this far from civilization. The cabin became a gathering place of sorts, a spot where travelers knew they could stop and rest and be treated with dignity. Sometimes people from Black Hollow Ridge would make the journey. They'd arrive sheepish and apologetic, admitting they'd been wrong, that they missed having Mara around. She treated them the same as everyone else, professionally, competently, without judgment. But she never offered to come back, and she never pretended that what they'd done to her had been acceptable. Don't you want them to apologize? Rhett asked after one such visit. They did apologize. I mean, really apologize. Admit how badly they treated you. Mara considered it. I used to think I did. I used to imagine them coming up here and begging for forgiveness, acknowledging that they'd been cruel and wrong. But now? She shrugged. Now I realize their apology doesn't change anything. It doesn't make the past hurt less, and it doesn't make the future any different. All it does is make them feel better about themselves. So you don't forgive them? I don't know if I forgive them or not, but I know I don't need their validation anymore. And that's freedom, Rhett. That's what I was really looking for all along. News about Vane's trial reached them in late summer. He'd been found guilty on multiple counts of corruption, theft, and abuse of authority. The sentence was 15 years in territorial prison. When Rhett read the letter from Garrett detailing the verdict, his expression was complicated. "You okay?" Mara asked. "Yeah, just processing." He folded the letter carefully. "Part of me thought he'd get away with it, that men like him always do. But he didn't." "No, he didn't." Rhett looked at her. "That grisly attack. Garrett found evidence that Vane hired someone to wound the bear and drive it toward my camp. It wasn't an accident. He tried to have me killed and make it look natural." Mara felt cold fury wash through her. "That bastard! He's going to prison for 15 years. That's something." "It's not enough." "Maybe not, but it's what we got." Rhett reached for her hand. "And it means we're safe now. Really safe. Vane can't hurt us anymore." The knowledge settled over them like a weight lifting. For the first time since that initial blizzard ride, they could truly relax, could plan for a future that extended beyond just surviving the next threat. As fall arrived and the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides, Mara found herself reflecting on everything that had changed. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, desperate for approval, willing to shrink herself to fit into spaces that would never truly welcome her, convinced that her worth was measured by other people's acceptance. That woman felt like a stranger now. The Mara who existed today knew her own value, knew that strength came in many forms, that kindness wasn't weakness, that choosing your own path was the bravest thing you could do, even when, especially when, everyone said you were making a mistake. She'd learned that love wasn't about being perfect or easy or convenient. It was about being seen, fully and completely, with all your scars and flaws and rough edges, and being chosen anyway. Not despite those things, but including them. And she'd learned that sometimes the life you're supposed to live looks nothing like the life you planned. That the best things come from the moments when you stop trying to fit into someone else's story and start writing your own. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Rhett said, "Do you ever miss it? Town, I mean." "No," Mara said without hesitation. "Not even a little." "Not even the parts that were good?" There weren't that many good parts. And the ones that existed were always conditional, always dependent on me being useful enough, quiet enough, small enough. She looked at him. "Here, I'm just myself. That's more valuable than anything I had before." "Even though it's hard? Even though we're isolated and sometimes struggle and have to work twice as hard for half as much? Especially because of that." Mara took his hand. "Easy doesn't mean better, Rhett. And comfortable doesn't mean happy. I'd rather have this real and difficult and mine than spend another day pretending I'm something I'm not just to make other people comfortable." He pulled her closer, and they sat together as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. The mountains rose around them, solid and eternal, and the cabin behind them glowed with warm light from the fire inside. "You know what I think?" Mara said after a while. "What?" "I think the world is full of people who never find the place where they fit, who spend their whole lives trying to wedge themselves into spaces that were never shaped for them, and they die never knowing what it feels like to just belong." "And you feel like you belong? Here? With you?" She smiled. "More than I've ever belonged anywhere." "Good." Rhett pressed a kiss to her temple. "Because you're stuck with me now. Is that a threat or a promise?" "Both." They laughed together, and the sound carried across the clearing, mixing with the whisper of wind through pine trees and the distant call of an owl hunting in the growing dark. Mara thought about all the people who'd doubted her, who'd looked at her and decided she was too weak, too soft, too much of a burden to be worth their time. She thought about the sheriff who'd tried to humiliate her, the townspeople who'd mocked her, the casual cruelty of people who'd accepted her labor but never her humanity. And she thought about how none of it mattered anymore. How their opinions had become background noise, irrelevant and meaningless, drowned out by the truth of the life she'd built with her own hands and her own choices. She'd ridden into a blizzard to save a dying man, and in doing so, she'd saved herself. Not from death, but from a life half-lived, from the slow suffocation of trying to be someone else's version of acceptable. The woman the town had dismissed as weak had turned out to be the strongest person in the mountains, strong enough to face down an armed sheriff, strong enough to choose love over safety, strong enough to build a life from nothing in a place where nothing came easy. And the man everyone had called a savage, a recluse, a dangerous loner, He turned out to be the first person who looked at Mara and saw someone worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth loving without conditions or caveats. Together, they'd created something that didn't exist before, a place where people were judged by their character rather than their circumstances, where help was given freely, where healing happened not just of bodies, but of hearts that had been told they didn't matter. As darkness settled fully over the mountains and the stars emerged in brilliant profusion overhead, Mara felt a peace so complete it almost frightened her. She'd spent so much of her life braced for the next hurt, the next rejection, that contentment felt foreign, unsettling, but she was learning to trust it. Learning that sometimes the happy ending wasn't a destination, but a series of choices made over and over again. The choice to stay, to fight, to love, to believe that she deserved all the good things she'd found. "What are you thinking now?" Rhett asked. Mara smiled in the darkness. "I'm thinking that 6 months ago, everyone expected me to die in a blizzard. And in a way, I did. The person I was before that night is gone. But what I became instead is so much better than what I left behind. No regrets? Not a single one." And it was true. Every hardship, every moment of fear, every sacrifice had led her here. To this porch, this man, this life that was entirely, authentically, unapologetically hers. The mountains stood silent witness to their story, as they'd witnessed countless stories before. Stories of people who came west looking for gold and found heartbreak. People who built empires and lost everything. People who arrived as strangers and left as legends. But this story, Mara and Rhett's story, wasn't about gold or empires or legends. It was about two people who'd been broken by the world and found each other in the pieces, who'd taken their scars and their loneliness and their determination not to give up and built something beautiful from it. It was a story about a nurse nobody believed in and a mountain man everyone feared, who proved that sometimes the people the world dismisses are the ones who change it most. Not through grand gestures or heroic acts, but through the simple, radical choice to live authentically. To love without apology. To see each other's worth when no one else would. And if there was a lesson in any of it, it was this. The world will always try to tell you who you should be, what you should want, where you should belong. But the truth is that you're the only one who gets to decide those things. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ignore every voice telling you you're making a mistake and choose the life that makes you feel most alive. Even if that life is hard, even if it's lonely, even if everyone thinks you're a fool for wanting it. Because at the end of your days, what matters isn't whether you made other people comfortable. It's whether you lived as yourself. Whether you loved and were loved in return. Whether you built something real in a world full of pretense. Mara had found all of that on a mountain most people couldn't even find on a map. With a man most people were too scared to talk to. In a life most people would consider a failure. And she wouldn't trade it for anything.